From South Carolina Public Radio, this is the South Carolina Lede. I'm your host, Gavin Jackson, and this episode was recorded on February 13th, 2023 from James Island, South Carolina. Just so you know, some of the information in this podcast may have changed by the time you've heard it. In this episode, we look at the busy week ahead at the State House, including debate in the House on Wednesday on Republicans' near total abortion ban bill with limited exceptions. Several bills will be moving through the House and Senate committees focusing on bond reform, constitutional carry, and others. We have a troubling report on the increasing number of drug overdose deaths in our state, and we hear from Clemson psychology professor Dr. Robin Kowalski about her research on trauma, bullying, what leads to school shootings, and how to complain better. A personal favorite there. And the Lede wishes you a happy Valentine's Day. That's right. While the Lede struggles with commercial holidays, we do believe in the power of love. And we love all of our listeners out there. That's why I want you to call us and share some more of that love at 803-563-7169. Leave us your name, where you're calling from, maybe what you're doing for Valentine's Day, what you're not doing, how you would take the Lede out for a Valentine's Day date, any number of things. 803-563-7169. Let's start off with a State House preview for this week. In the Senate, committee meetings on Tuesday will focus on a bill to levy higher motor vehicle license and registration fees for new residents. That's S-208. One bill, S-256, will allow public schools to allow students, with parental consent, to possess and use sunscreen while on school property or at a school-sponsored event or activity without being required to have a physician's note or prescription, and without having to store the sunscreen at a particular location on the school property. Now, I don't really pick bills that I care about too much, but this one, everyone wear the sunscreen, okay? Lede says sunscreen. And moisturize. On Wednesday, SCDOT Secretary Christy Hall will present the annual State of DOT report to the Senate Transportation Committee. And on Thursday, two bills that increase penalties for destructing utilities will be before a subcommittee. Comptroller General Richard Ekstrom will also be before a Senate Finance Subcommittee explaining that $3.5 billion double counting error that has rocked state government. House committee meetings this week include a full Judiciary Committee agenda on Tuesday that will tackle the constitutional carry bill, which will allow legal gun owners to carry a gun without a concealed weapons permit or training. That's H. 3594. Another bill before the committee will create an additional criminal offense for offenders who are on bond and commit a crime. H. 3532 will add a mandatory minimum of 5 additional years to a sentence if someone who has been charged with a crime is out on bond and is convicted of committing or attempts to commit a violent crime, strong-arm robbery, criminal sexual conduct, criminal domestic violence in the first or second degree, and any offense involving child pornography. Service of the 5-year sentence is mandatory unless a longer mandatory minimum term of imprisonment is provided by law. Now, the court shall also impose a mandatory 5-year sentence to run consecutively, and a person sentenced under this law would not be eligible for parole or work release for good behavior. And another bill by House Speaker Merle Smith, H. 3591, would ask voters in the next general election whether they want to repeal the prohibition against the state or its political subdivisions from providing direct aid to religious or other private educational institutions. So, public money for private schools. We also expect the House to get on its near-total abortion ban bill, H. 3774, on Wednesday. The bill would ban abortion at conception, with the only exceptions being for rape or incest during the first 12 weeks, and in the case of fatal fetal anomaly, and if the life and health of the mother is in jeopardy. Now, that does not include psychological or emotional conditions. Last week, the Senate passed S. 474, which allows for the same exceptions as well as abortions up to 6 weeks, which is when cardiac activity represented as electrical impulses of the embryo can first be detected, though a real actual heart is not developed for at least another 11 weeks. Now, at 6 weeks, most women don't know they are pregnant and have an embryo, not a fetus, not a baby, an embryo growing inside of them. Now, an embryo becomes a fetus around 10 weeks of pregnancy and is about an inch long, so just a little information there for you. And like we mentioned in Saturday's Wind Down, I will be traveling to New Hampshire and Iowa to follow South Carolina's own Nikki Haley in her initial swing through the early voting states. So stay tuned to the podcast and South Carolina Public Radio for exclusive 2024 trail content. I'm going to do my best to juggle the next few pods while also bringing you all action from the State House. but I expect we will be hearing several reports from the Russ McKinney, reports you can always find on southcarolinapublicradio.org. So we got the bills out of the way, but let's move on to some more news. Last week, we got some disturbing information that the trend in overdoses continued last year in our state, as public health experts sadly anticipated. DHEC found that from 2020 to 2021, the number of drug overdose deaths in South Carolina increased by more than 430 individuals, from 1,734 deaths to 2,168 deaths, an increase of more than 25%. By comparison, there were only 573 drug overdose deaths in the state in 2012. Opioids continue to be the primary cause of overdose deaths in recent years. 80% of fatal overdoses in 2021 involved opioids. Sarah Goldsby of the Department of Alcohol and Other Drug Abuse Services, known as DAODAS, was on a call with DHEC Director of Public Health Dr. Brandon Traxler discussing these findings. Here's Dr. Traxler.
To help people understand, I often explain that most medications, including other opioids, are given in doses that are measured in milligrams. But fentanyl, when it's used appropriately in medical settings, is given in doses measured in micrograms. And it takes 1,000 micrograms to equal a milligram. Fentanyl is increasingly being added to other drugs to enhance the potency and addiction potential, often without the user of the drug aware. This dangerous situation leads to many overdoses and overdose deaths.
DAODAS Director Sarah Goldsby said treatment is available out there and people can survive addiction. But with the greater prevalence of the synthetic opioid fentanyl, it has greatly increased death and addiction here and nationwide.
As we look at 2021's data and we see another year of loss and heartache, it can be easy to feel discouraged. But it's important to remember that substance misuse can be prevented and that addiction entirely is preventable. It's treatable. It's incurable, unfortunately. Most chronic diseases are incurable, but people can and do manage them and recover from them. And there's no difference with addiction. Dr. Traxler mentioned the incredible potency of the fentanyl that has infiltrated our nation's illicit drug supply. And as she mentioned, it's responsible for a great number of overdose incidents that we're experiencing. But it's important to remember that fentanyl is now being found in cocaine and methamphetamine and the prescription drug lookalikes that we're seeing on the street, as she mentioned, and that there is risk of overdose in drugs beyond those that we believe to be opioids. And so anyone at risk of using illicit drugs is at risk of overdose.
Now, Goldsby did add that overdose death increases were lower than previous ones, but the trend is still problematic.
2020 to 2021 increased less than we increased from 2019 to 2020, which may get to your point about the shift during the pandemic. I think two things occurred in 2020. We are very well aware of the circumstances with COVID-19 that drove isolation, uncertainty, a lot of feelings of anxiety and depression. And you all have heard me say this before, people misuse substances, including alcohol and drugs, to either feel good or to not feel bad. During 2020, during the uncertainty of COVID, we had a lot of folks feelings that they may have wanted to alter with drugs or alcohol. So that occurred nationwide, but simultaneously, and what we know from our law enforcement intelligence is that the drug supply shifted at that same time. And so in early 2020, as we were observing incidents of overdose statewide on a week-to-week basis, we really did start to see a shift in real time, March, April, and May, as the drug supply changed pretty dramatically and as people went into isolation. And so I think we have probably two simultaneous situations occurring that has changed the trend that we're seeing.
Now, just a note, Narcan is available statewide over the counter, and fentanyl test strips are legal in South Carolina. All of those can be found at support organizations like the Courage Center in Lexington and at DHEC. There are also a lot of resources and information available on justplainkillers.com. Here's more from Sarah Goldsby.
When we think about how the data has shifted demographically, we are seeing the data change even in our week-to-week observations of more people of different populations experiencing overdoses now than we saw a couple of years ago. we believe, and we pretty much feel certain that that's related to the fentanyl being laced in the cocaine and methamphetamine. So people who are intending to use cocaine, never intending to use an opioid, experiencing an overdose because they were unaware of that opioid in that cocaine. We have to also think broadly about who might be at risk and reconsider perhaps the folks we know who are using methamphetamine or cocaine are also at risk. And that's where the importance of the overdose prevention kits that DHEC distributes it really is, because with the fentanyl test strips and the Narcan combined, you've got a kit that can really save a life end to end.
Now, as drug overdoses continue to command our attention state and nationwide, Clemson University announced that 2 new academic research centers established in the College of Behavioral, Social, and Health Sciences will work to address critical public health needs. Recently approved by the Clemson Board of Trustees, the Centers for Addiction and Mental Health Research and Public Health Modeling and Response will collaborate with Clemson University faculty, staff, students, community partners, clinicians, and public health stakeholders to prevent and mitigate public health problems, including but not limited to addiction and mental health conditions, infectious diseases, food insecurity, and more. Clemson University also said that the Center for Addiction and Mental Health Research will expand on the existing synergy of addiction, mental health, and wellness research within the college and across the university to inform policy, reduce harms, and improve the quality of life for individuals and communities throughout the state and nation. Now, speaking of Clemson, in separate but related news, I spoke with psychology professor Dr. Robin Kowalski recently on This Week in South Carolina about her research on school shooters, the concept of mattering, the traumas we seem to be exposed to daily, and her research into complaining. I heard Dr. Kowalski on the podcast Hidden Brain recently and decided to set up this interview, especially in light of the mass shootings in Southern California that gripped our country in January, as well as the horrific killing of Tyree Nichols at the hands of Memphis police officers. I started off by asking her about the greater awareness of mental health that we're seeing these days and what's fueling that. Now, this is a bit of a longer clip, but it's really interesting here, so take a listen.
We have so much increased media attention over the last few years, particularly with school shootings and other, like you said, national tragedies. And I think when things like that arise, the risk, of course, is that there's a habituation factor that occurs. But I think the positive upside, if you can say that there is one, is that I think it does make us more aware. I think people start, doing more research into what could be causing this. So I think that has led to just the increased scrutiny into the causes of it, and therefore increased attention into what we can do about what we perceive as causes or correlates of the different tragedies.
So not so much as a scapegoat as much as maybe just more attention.
Absolutely. Because, with the school shootings, for example, we know that there are certain antecedent conditions that are not meant to, at least based on the research that we've done and some other people have done. And those antecedent conditions are never meant to profile. There's plenty of people who have mental health issues, obviously, who don't go on to become school shooters. We know that rejection is a key antecedent condition of people who are involved in school shootings. But there's plenty of people, for example, who are bullied who don't go on to become school shooters. But I think what we can take away from that is, if we know that these antecedent conditions exist, then we can implement programs, mental health awareness programs, anti-bullying programs, or bullying prevention programs is probably the more appropriate term, that will decrease the likelihood that people who might have gone on to perpetrate school shootings, that we can decrease the probability that that would occur.
Dr. Kowalski, your research focuses on complaining, teasing, and bullying like you're talking about, and also a focus on cyberbullying as well as the concept of mattering in relation to school shootings. So we'll talk about all these, but let's start with school shootings and shooters. You were just mentioning that there's not really a profile for a school shooter. It seems like it could be anyone, I guess, and that is a bit worrisome in itself too. But we haven't seen many school shootings in South Carolina. The last one I think that was really on our radar was that 2016 shooting at Townville Elementary School, which claimed the life of Jacob Hall. But there's always, a week doesn't really go by in South Carolina where a parent isn't getting a message from a son or a daughter saying we're on lockdown at school, which I can only imagine what that sends to a parent's mind at that point. So talk to us about school shooters and typically how they get to that point where they see that as the only way out.
So let me expand upon those sort of antecedent variables I mentioned before. So, back several years ago, we did some research looking at the shootings it was K through 12 shootings, and they had to meet certain criteria, like the shooting had to occur at school during the school day. So things that happened at football games or, other sporting events didn't meet our criteria. And there were 5. Again, I'm just going to call them correlates or antecedent conditions. And, one was a long-term history of rejection, like the bullying. Another one was a history of psychological problems. Another one was an acute rejection experience. Most of the K through 12 shooters are male, and most of them are white males. There's also a fascination with death and a fascination with guns and violence. So many of these shooters are fascinated with prior shooters and prior school shootings that have taken place. So, we found at that time, the study was published in 2003. So this was some time ago. We found that there were 15 shootings that met our criteria. So more recently, though, just a few years ago, we wanted to see, if those same correlates held up. And they did. And the number of shootings that met our criteria was a longer time span, of course, was much higher, was in the 50s. And again, there's been lots more school shootings that have taken place, but we had a very narrow set of criteria that have occurred since that time. But I think to your point, given that we have this relatively high prevalence of shootings that have occurred, like I mentioned, we can implement anti-bullying prevention programs. But, you mentioned mattering earlier. And mattering is a fairly recent psychological phenomenon that's fascinating. And, I was talking to one of my friends yesterday about the construct of mattering, and her comment was, she goes, I just think mattering is related to everything.
Can you define it? Can you tell us what that is?
Yes, I can. And I don't disagree with her. Mattering is it's the degree to which we feel important or significant, or the degree to which we make other people feel like they're important or significant. And the converse of it is that people who feel like they don't matter, they feel like they're invisible. Think about what that would feel like. That would not feel good to feel like that you were invisible to others. And, you can imagine that people who feel like they are rejected or feel like they don't belong, that means that they feel like they don't matter. And we've recently done a study looking at suicide posts in one of the subreddits. And we found that in over 70% of those posts, anti-mattering was present. Which again, that I think that speaks to the realness and the prevalence of this construct of mattering in, people's day-to-day lives. And so I think what comes out of that is, to the degree that we can make people feel like they are important, that they are significant, that they belong, that they matter, I think we can help to reduce, speaking to the school shootings in particular, I think we can reduce the shootings. People who feel marginalized feel like they don't matter. And it honestly takes so little to make somebody feel like they matter. Just a kind word, or why don't you sit with us for lunch? Or, it really does not take a lot of effort. And so to the degree that any of us can just reach out at whatever level, elementary school, middle school, high school, and beyond, and we believe the same thing applies. You mentioned cyberbullying.
Tell us about your research and complaining. What are there benefits? Are there different types of complaining? Tell us a little bit about this. We have a couple minutes left.
Yeah, so it's such a fun area to do research in. So because, if you think about it, complaining is a behavior that we all engage in, albeit to different degrees. And I love to dabble in research in areas that, very few people have dabbled in, but yet it's a behavior that, again, like I said, that everybody engages in. So, what we believe is that if done in moderation and if done strategically, in other words, you're not going to go and just complain all the time, because then you're going to, destroy relationships. And if you do it, you pick your audience carefully. You don't use up the same person over and over again. That complaining can be very effective. And there's plenty of, I think each person, again, who uses it in moderation and who does it strategically can find supporting evidence for that.
You say if you do it strategically, but then you also mentioned destroying relationships. So you're saying if I complain all the time, that's going to really just grate on people? It's going to grate on my approach towards people? How does that work?
It will, yeah. It uses people up. It wears on people. If you continue to just complain over and over and over again without being willing to do anything about it, there's different types of complaining. There's instrumental complaining. There's expressive complaining. Instrumental complaining is complaining that's designed to accomplish a very specific outcome. But, if I go to my next door neighbor and complain about the cable company or something like that, and I do it incessantly, well, she's going to tire of that. I don't know that she would completely ditch me as a friend, but she's eventually going to say, enough. If you are really that dissatisfied with it, go and complain to the company itself. But if it's expressive complaining, even still, if I'm just chronically just morose and complaining about this and that also wears on people, because it's like, just move on, find a way. I teach my students about ways to change their attributional style, because it comes across as this chronic pessimism, and there are ways to deal with it. You can check yourself. You can journal about it. There are ways to deal with your complaining that can be more effective than just continuing to, express it incessantly to other people.
Love that bit about complaining there at the end. Also, Dr. Kowalski gave insight on how she thinks more mental health professionals can get in the field where they are desperately needed. You can find out how and watch that entire interview on youtube.com/South Carolina ETV. Welcome to the wind down section, our little break from the news. We're glad you're here. And as many regular listeners will know, that this will be a little bit more of a somber wind down section. And for those that know, it's because of the Super Bowl. And that's why we have, I don't want to say much more without AT's consent here. So folks, AT Shire, producer of the Lead podcast.
Thank you.
An Eagles fan through and through, who's just
like you, Gavin,
today.
and just like everyone else who listens to this. We're all Eagles fans today.
Yeah, okay. I'm really going to let you have a wide berth here today. Gonna let you just work through this, and I'll be supportive. So yes, Eagles fan here listening to another Eagles fan.
Everyone, just consider this. A lot of people have reached out to me. This is the welfare check for all of you. I am surviving here. So before we get into this, we're not going to play a voicemail because we have one and it's a little long. But we did get a text that I will read from our own Grand Strand man, Roman.
Okay.
Gavin.
Yeah.
And this came in before the Super Bowl, sadly the Super Bowl that the Eagles lost. And he says, "Dear Gavin, stay warm in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Please consider wearing warm socks." Which you're not going to like that.
I hate that. They are just prisons for my feet.
He also says, "Looking good on cable news. Congratulations on announcing your candidacy for 2024.
Thank you.
You got my vote."
Thank you. Yes.
And he said, "Dear AT, good luck today. Go Birds." Sadly, Roman, that was not enough. And so I'm not going to sit here and break down the entire Super Bowl, though I could. I just want it on the record, though I could. Okay.
I know. I know.
Oh, I know. Okay. I know. Oh, I know. So I everyone knows the field was bad. Really tough call at the end of the game. Ticky-tack call that sort of took the decision of the game out of the players' hands, more in the refs' hands. So that was tough, right? But what really stuck out to me was this. I saw in the moment that we lost, I had a greater understanding of generational trauma here.
Wow.
Because it's going to be hard for you to believe this, Gavin. But when we lost, I had to be the strong one because it affected Caitlin so badly. And I saw on her face, I saw her shut down emotionally. I saw her shut down mentally, and you saw all the functions leave her body. And I was like, are you okay? After 5 minutes of her sitting there silently. And she just croaked out, "I need to watch Below Deck."
This is like what wedding vows are about right here, right?
Exactly. Yes. Better or for worse. And what really stuck out to me more, like the worst part about the Eagles losing this game wasn't the Eagles losing for me. It was me looking at Caitlin and seeing what I have done to her.
Oh my God.
Like she was not a fan of the Eagles before we met. She was blissfully unaware of this personal hell that we both live in, and to see her affected that way, I just couldn't stop thinking like, man, I did this to her.
And here you are wanting to do the same to all of our listeners.
Yeah, I know.
It's disgusting.
I apologize to the sphere, but it's a 6-6 cycle that I am going to get into again in next August and September, and I apologize ahead of time.
Yeah, it's okay. So, we are here for you.
With all of that said, that's all I'm going to say about the game, the Super Bowl. But Gavin, what the wind down truly is for is to wind down. I need this right now.
You do need this. It's a safe space.
We're going to talk about, of course,
Super Bowl commercials.
Super Bowl commercials. Yes. We're going to do our favorites and least favorites.
I just want to start off by saying, and maybe people can back me up here. Maybe you can support me for once.
For once in your life. Yeah.
Like our whole sphere has. I just overall was just not blown away.
They didn't have the juice. They didn't have the juice.
Not like the Super Bowls of our youth, of our 20s.
Where are the Budweiser from?
Where are they? Where were the Budweiser commercials? There was one Budweiser
from.
We didn't even see the Clydesdales. Now, I will say one of my favorite commercials started out strong. There was the Dunkin' commercial with Ben Affleck.
Ben? Yeah.
And then J-Lo's like, this is where you go when you say you're working?
That was a good one. That was a commercial of destiny there.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like the internet and everyone agreed, Ben, you got to do this.
Do it. It was perfect. It was beautiful. What was one of your favorites?
Okay, so I'll hit you with two. Obviously, the Fast and Furious.
I was just going to say Fast X trailer.
That looked great. When he pulls those two helicopters down with his car.
You couldn't see.
I laughed.
My eyes rolling from back home.
It's so good. And honestly, another movie trailer for me. The Indiana Jones trailer looked pretty good.
Yeah.
I really like that. Dial of Destiny. Dial me into it, please, okay?
Two, please.
I'm interested.
Yes, I like that one too. I like the Mr. Peanut roast one. I laughed out loud. You were not in a good situation at that point.
I wasn't. I texted you back. I liked him better when he was dead.
I was like, oh God, we're in a dark place right here.
It was a bad moment for me.
I thought it was so funny. I'm like, oh my God, what a clever idea. They're literally roasting Mr. Peanut, and he's like talking about how they killed him off, and then
he is a roasted
I
peanut.
will admit that I later on, late in the evening, watched the 11-minute roast on YouTube.
That's sick, dude. That is sick of you. You're diseased for watching that. I like these spokes foods. The M&M spokes candies made that appearance at the end. Oh yeah, Gavin is big in the anthropomorphic spokes.
I'm everything
things.
they say that we need to worry about when it comes to the spokes candies.
If you're a brand and you want to hook Gavin, make it not a person but a living object, please.
Yes, personified.
Gavin's got a real thing for the hamburger helper glove. Bring him back, please.
Oh, the Pillsbury Doughboy. I will just say, since we're on this topic, anytime I see a barbecue joint where like the pig is happy and he's playing along with his ensuing death, I'm like, oh, look how fun! The pig's having a great time.
Even he likes it.
I want to eat there.
He wants to go to the slaughterhouse.
How about some of the duds, AT?
Okay, I have. Flat? This is one that I felt in the depths of when it was like right when I realized that we weren't going to get the ball back. Mm-hmm. We weren't going to have time to go and try and make this up and win. The U2 commercial came on, and it even cut through all of my despair and enraged me. Because think about the band, the people that everyone loves to hate, U2, and you could tell they planned this for months and months and months. And of course, right now, their commercial to announce their Las Vegas residency is balloon centric.
You're not a big U2 fan. I was like, oh, this is not good for AT right now.
And it cut through the depths of my despair. And I texted Gavin. I was like, of course, these shills, U2, the people who forced their way onto all of our iPhones collectively,
yes.
These losers that had the red iPods. They have the balloon commercial.
I didn't like all the Temu shop like a billionaire commercials because I can just vouch for all the other billionaires out there. We're not shopping at Temu, baby. Like
billionaires like you and everybody else.
Here's your $8 like dress that's probably made of like oil or something, some sort of petrochemical that's burning in Ohio right now. Godspeed to the folks in East Palestine. But yeah, that was a dud. There were a couple other ones. I wasn't crazy about the Tubi one. I know everyone lost their minds when they thought their screens were moving without their consent. But I'm like, I know that's not my TV because I've never used Tubi before.
Yeah. I 99.99999% of people have never have ever engaged Tubi in their life.
Do not engage Tubi, okay? Be safe,
and
folks.
So Caitlin looked at me. She was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "That's not me. This is a commercial. Do not worry." Okay.
That reminds me of the Pepsi Super Bowl halftime show where Lady Gaga performed, and I had friends over. We were watching it. Everyone was loving the big screen, and I went to go turn up the volume, and I hit the channel change, and then you would have thought that I put a bullet in someone's head because the looks I got. I was like,
Yeah.
it's okay. I will go back. I thought
go
the
back.
halftime show was good.
I
Riri?
thought it was honestly a little sleepy, if anything.
I'm
No
gonna
guests.
call it sleepy with all the puffs.
But it honestly, I mean, for me, someone who's played some Mario video games, it looked like Super Smash Brothers. To
Yes.
me. The different levels, you know what I mean? And I was like, this is Super Smash Brothers. And then no guests was tough for me. And
She had a baby. That's the guest right there. I
a
think,
lot of people are saying that. I did like that she worked in her line of cosmetics. I was like, you go, synergize,
Fenty,
girl.
yes.
And then I did notice that Twitter was not loving it. They were sort of like, love Rihanna, sort of boring. But as soon as they came out, all the Fox announcers were like, everyone loved that. Everyone loved it. So they were doing some
Michael
damage
Strahan was
control
like
there.
trying to get like a high five with Rihanna at the end there. I was like, do what you need to do, brother.
I would have done that too. I'd be
thought-
like, Rihanna, please touch me.
I thought it was awesome, especially because she was pregnant, and you're like, oh, she's just doing it. Homegirl's just doing it. I respect that.
Mm-hmm.
It was also good as Apple Music. A friend of mine actually was working that production, which is just insane to think about. A good Kent State grad behind the scenes there. Another, what was it, $7 million or $6.5 million roughly for 30 seconds of ad time. So
Yeah.
again, really nothing too crazy. I did like the Rakuten ad with Alicia Silverstone. Way to go for her. Really keep cashing in on that one.
I love that one. I loved that one.
I
That
thought,
was
I
really
thought everyone
good.
looked great. I thought it was very on brand because everyone's 90s obsessed. And they were still just keeping it tight, I thought. Everyone's looking fresh.
They did. They look great. I mean, I bet everyone Googled, me included, Alicia Silverstone age. After that,
It's a career-defining role that just keeps on giving. So more power to you.
God, yeah, milk it, baby. Go on. Anyway, people, let us know what you liked. Let us know what you didn't like. Referees, the field,
Referees,
and
the field.
Eagles losing.
The field.
And
They
the
took
field
2
was
years getting that
pathetic.
grass, and then
Pathetic.
They just
Truly
overwatered
pathetic.
it. Like what?
When players on both teams are all saying that is the worst field hands down they've ever played on. It's pathetic.
And it's the
I can't
Super
get into
Bowl.
this.
I know.
I'm gonna
I don't want
have
to spiral
a heart
you.
attack.
I don't.
So let's get this. Gavin, hit the credits. I'm gonna lose my mind. Okay. Have a good week, everybody.
I'll tell you who didn't spend $6.5 million on advertising, and that is South Carolina ETV and South Carolina Public Radio. We love you. That's why you need to help donate to us and keep the calls going. 1-800-256-8535 is a way to support public radio. You can also go online, southcarolinapublicradio.org, and hit that donate button. We are out of the pledge drive right now, but we could still use your support. But show us your appreciation by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or a voicemail at 803-563-7169 or a text message like Roman did to that same number. We will take it. You can also stay up to date with the latest news on scetv.org and southcarolinapublicradio.org. And don't forget to support your local newspapers. For the South Carolina Lede, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina.
It's going to blow up in my face, and I'll have more welfare checks from people I know on the internet.
And I'm like, AT, you're doing it. You're like, I don't care. I'm going whole hog. I'm like, please don't.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh,
AT, don't. AT, don't.
please stop. You're drinking it too fast. I don't care.